Well, howdy everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Lauren Muzyka Show, your favorite update in the battle for life, family, and freedom. So thrilled to have you with me once again. I'm Lauren Muzyka, attorney and human rights advocate, and I serve as president and CEO of Sidewalk Advocates for Life, the nation's largest peaceful sidewalk outreach organization. Former abortion workers. This is an ever-growing group of people, believe it or not. There are now hundreds of women and men who have left and are speaking out. And let me tell you, what they have to share about what really takes place behind the doors of an abortion facility will blow your mind. In fact, they're arguably the most influential when it comes to the abortion issue because they have actually sold it. They've seen it. They've experienced the repercussions of it. And the vast majority of them have one or more abortions in their own background. And they've come out the other side to share their perspective. Now, there's someone who is leading the charge and helped to grow this group by leaps and bounds, and that is former Planned Parenthood director Abby Johnson. I'm so excited to have a conversation with her today and next week about outreach at an abortion facility. What works, what doesn't, and where we go in America from here. So let me go ahead and give her a proper introduction, especially if you're still getting to know her. Abby Johnson's desire to help women in need eventually led her to a career with Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider. The same desire also caused her to eventually leave the organization and become an outspoken advocate for the pro-life movement. During her 8 years with Planned Parenthood, Abby quickly rose through its ranks and became the clinic director. But she became increasingly disturbed by what she witnessed. Everything changed in September of 2009 when Abby was asked to assist with an ultrasound-guided abortion, where she watched a 13-week-old baby fight and struggle for his life at the hand of the abortionist. At that moment, Abby sought help from the local pro-life movement and swore that she would, from then on, advocate for life and expose abortion for what it truly is. Now, Planned Parenthood took immediate action to silence Abby with a gag order, but the lawsuit was quickly exposed as the sham that it was. Today, Abby travels the globe speaking and sharing her story. She's the author of 4 books, 2 documentaries, and her story was just turned into a movie. She's the founder of And Then There Were None, Abortion Worker Ministry, a ministry designed to help abortion clinic workers transition out of the industry without fear of exploitation, and Pro-Love Ministries, which bridges service gaps in the pro-life movement. Abby lives in the great state of Texas with her husband and 8 children. Let's welcome to the show, Abby Johnson. Hey, Abby.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
It's so great to have you. It's always such an incredible discussion with you. You are a wealth of information and inspiration to so many people. Again, so honored to have you. Let's go ahead and start with a foundation. I know we've had this discussion many times, but there are still people out there who are getting to know you and your story. So if someone were to ask you, how does someone who used to work for America's abortion empire become pro-life? What would you say to that? How would you answer that?
Well, I would say partly it was kind of just opening my eyes to, I mean, kind of happened in one way, it kind of happened slowly. And in another way, it happened in an instant. So, um, you know, when you are surrounded by such tangible evil, and I mean that it's very palpable evil in the abortion industry. So, you know, you are abortion is not, I think a lot of people think about abortion, they think about it kind of in an abstract sense, like, oh, it's yeah, okay, abortion, it's killing babies. Um, but for me, like when I think about abortion, um, I think about the way that the babies looked in the dish after we aborted them. Um, I think about the way that the the POC lab smelled. Abortion has a very distinct sort of smell. Um, I,
Mm.
I think about the way that, it sounded during an abortion, the way the suction machine sounded, and the sound we were listening for to know that the abortion was complete. Um, So I think about abortion in a very different way. I think about it in a very real, tangible way. It's not abstract for me. And I think when you're kind of in that sort of realness, when you've lived in that sort of real evil, I think that your heart becomes it has to become hardened um, to what you're surrounded in every single day, or else you couldn't go into work every day. You couldn't do what you're doing every day. If you actually felt that sort of evil, if you actually felt the pain that you should feel when you're looking at those babies in a dish, when you're hearing that suction noise, right? Like if you actually felt the pain, you wouldn't be able to do it every day. And so I think a callousness, sort of a numbness surrounds your heart. And, really only the Holy Spirit can intervene and sort of break through that callousness and sort of knock that hardness away. And for me, it was just there were little things at a time that I think the Lord began to reveal to me that had really kind of been there all along, but I just did not have eyes to see it. And, you know, it's like the story of Saul to Paul. Like I had this veil over my eyes. I had these scales over my eyes, and suddenly the scales fell, and you start seeing things for really what they are. The hard part then is not justifying it. Um, because then if things are really as bad as you see them to be, then you have to sort of come to grips with the fact that you have been directly involved in this evil and that you have participated in it and that you have been aligned with the enemy, right? That everything you've been doing has been in lockstep with the enemy. And so that's a hard leap to sort of make, and that's a hard thing to accept. Um, but once I don't really think that you can find freedom. I don't really think that you can find healing until you do accept it. And so, there were a lot of little things, recognizing that I have this quota of abortions that I have to sell and that they want me to double that quota. Recognizing that, we were going to be aborting babies through the point of viability, something that I had said I never wanted to participate in. Now I'm being asked not only to do it, but I was going to be put in a position to run that affiliate. Um, but ultimately watching a live ultrasound guided abortion, seeing a child fight and struggle for his life, something I'd never seen before. God gave me that opportunity to see this reality. And honestly, I really did want to justify it because that would have been a lot easier. But sometimes the Lord makes things so clear, you're unable to see anything but the truth.
Yeah, yeah, wow, so powerful. Let me ask this because I'm sure some people are wondering this. You grew up in a Christian household. I've met your parents. They're amazing. I love your mom, right? How does someone who grows up in a Christian household end up in the abortion industry? And sometimes we look at some of these workers and we naturally ask ourselves, wow, how did you even get there? I know that we at Sidewalk Advocates for Life have heard a lot about the fact that many of them are single moms. They're just trying to make ends meet and all of that. But can you speak to how someone ends up at Planned Parenthood in the first place? Like, why don't they leave immediately, right? That's another question that a lot of people of faith have. Like, oh, I would just run out of the products of conception lab. But there's something deeper going on there. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I did grow up in a Christian home. But we did not talk about abortion in my home. We didn't. I think it was probably a different time. I'm 44. I was born in 1980. I think growing up in the 80s and early 90s, I don't think abortion was in the media like it is today.
Yeah.
Um, nobody was standing up at a podium and shouting for abortion. Gloria Steinem had not yet gone on the cover of Vanity Fair, with her shirt that said, "I've had an abortion." Um, People were not proud of their sin. We weren't living in a time where people were just actively wearing their sin on their sleeve or on their t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
And I think growing up in church, I think my parents just kind of probably assumed that the church was talking about hard things, and then the church assumes that the parents are talking about hard things, and then nobody's talking about the hard things. And and so I went to college just very uneducated about any sort of controversial topics. And and so that leaves a kid very vulnerable. That leaves a kid very vulnerable to these sorts of social justice organizations because I knew nothing about any of it. And I kind of have a rebellious spirit. So when when I meet this woman with Planned Parenthood and she starts talking about feminism and all this stuff, I didn't know what that was, but I was like, it sounds like something my parents wouldn't like. So, I got involved kind of immediately because I believed the lie, right? That they want to help women, they want to take care of women, they want women's rights, and like who doesn't want all of that kind of stuff, right? And I remember the first day I went to the clinic, to volunteer. And I remember going there and kind of seeing these two different groups on the sidewalk, right? There were these people that were more aggressive on the sidewalk. And then there were people who were kind of standing there, like, I recognized that they were praying a rosary and they were just kind of standing there praying and trying to talk to women coming in. And there was this other group that was definitely came across as more aggressive, more hostile. And I remember going in to volunteer that day. And I mean, I can't tell you I was like pro choice at the time. I didn't really know what I thought about abortion. But I remember rolling up to the clinic that day and seeing these two different groups and hearing the words that were coming out of this more aggressive a group, this more aggressive group, the words that were coming out of their mouths, the things they were saying to the women going in, and thinking, if this is pro-life Christianity, then I want nothing to do with it.
No.
You know, I the this place in here, they're the good guys, right? And this out here on the sidewalk, these are the bad guys. The Christians are the bad guys in this situation. Sometimes I wonder, you don't ever want to like go down the road and play the what if game. But I mean, sometimes I do wonder, like, what what would have happened? Like if those people wouldn't have been out there that day, you know, would I just have maybe I would have done the shift, but maybe I would have gotten out, gotten in my car later on that day and been like, why are we even out here? Right? Like what if we're because I do remember thinking, like, if they're pro-choice, why do they care if
Yeah.
somebody goes to the fence and takes information and makes a different choice? I do remember thinking that, but then I'm looking over at this other group, a guy that's wearing a Grim Reaper suit, and I'm thinking, that's why. That's why we're out here.
From the Grim
And
Reaper.
yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes I wonder, like, what if they wouldn't have been there, right?
Mhm.
Like that, our actions and our inaction, but certainly our actions have the potential to change the trajectory of someone's life.
Mhm.
And it could possibly have changed the trajectory of my life that day. And I don't know that. I won't ever know that. But it's the same thing. Like I think about when I went and had my first abortion and I walked in, my boyfriend dropped me off, and I walked into that clinic alone, and nobody was out there. There was nobody, you know, there's no one out there, no sidewalk advocates out there, no, it was just a brown building. It was in a strip center. And, I was scared. I was scared of my parents' disapproval, but there was nobody out there like saying, hey, like, have you even talked to your parents? Like, have you prayed about this? Have you thought about this? Like, because I hadn't. I was just kind of going along with what my boyfriend told me to do. And if somebody would have said, like, hey, are your parents going to be more disappointed to know that, yeah, like you had sex before you were married? Are they going to be more disappointed to know that you took the life of their grandchild? Like, if somebody would have said that to me, I would have known the answer. Like, they're still grieving the loss of their two grandchildren. Like, I would have known that, but there was nobody there. And I think, what if I wouldn't have had that first abortion? Like, that would have changed the trajectory of my life. So, I mean, our actions really do matter. Our activism really matters. And I guess the answer to your second question, a lot of women who go to work in the industry, we talk to a lot of them. A lot of times they don't even know it's an abortion clinic. They get hired. The ad will say like women's health clinic or something or OBGYN office, and they'll get hired not having any idea it's an abortion clinic. And, they'll be working like in birth control service, they'll be handing out birth control or doing pap smears or something the first few days. And then all of a sudden they go into work and everything is set up completely different. The clinic looks, everything's set up differently. They have the abortion machines out, all this kind of stuff. And they're like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, today we're doing abortions. And they have no idea. But by this point, a lot of these women have been looking for a job for a long time. Now they finally get a job. They're being paid more than they would be paid anywhere else, right? They're technically unqualified a lot of times to do the job that they're doing. Um, and, like you said, a lot of these women are single moms. And so they're like, okay, well, let me just see how it is, right? So they stay and they're like, okay, well, it wasn't that bad, right? I didn't really have to do anything. I just took the money, or I just, handed them pills, or I was just in the recovery room. So I wasn't really like involved, you know? And so they kind of justify it that way and they stay. And then essentially they kind of get hooked on a lifestyle that they wouldn't be able to afford anywhere else. So they get into a lease that they wouldn't be able to afford if they weren't working at the clinic, right? Or they get into a car payment that they wouldn't be able to afford if they were working at Chick-fil-A or somewhere like that, right? And and then all of a sudden they're taken back to the POC lab and they're like, "Holy crap. Like this is evil. This is what we're doing. This is." And by then they're like, "I can't leave." They feel trapped. They're like, "I can't get out of here." Like for the first time my kids have health insurance, you know, or they have a sick kid and their kid needs insurance and this is the first place they've had. I mean, there's so many situations. We talk all the time in the pro-life movement about the abortion industry preying on women who have abortions, right? Like they prey on the low income, they prey on the minority population, whatever. They do the same to the abortion clinic worker. If you look at the majority of people who are working in the abortion clinics, they are poor minority women. The majority of people working the abortion clinic at the lower level jobs, that's who it is. Those hourly wage workers, they are poor, undereducated, uneducated minority women. That's who your hourly workers are in the abortion industry. And so they're preying on that same population. In fact, a lot of the women that come through and then there were none were actually offered jobs at the same time that they were getting their abortions at their clinic. So they'll be in the recovery room from their abortion, and the recovery room nurse will be like, "Oh, you know what? We're hiring. So if you need a job, like here's the application, just come back, just turn in the application, we'll hire you on the spot."
Wow, I think that's so important for us to understand because it's so easy for those of us that have been people of faith for a long time to say, oh, well, they should have just left, right? And we don't understand that we're standing where we stand because of grace. That it's easy for us to say, oh, I would have just quit as soon as I saw this or experienced this, right? For someone who may not have been raised in the faith, or, yeah, maybe they went to church once in a while on a Sunday, they're in a tough spot. Maybe you start out as the receptionist and then your help is needed in another part of the clinic. And then all of a sudden, you're further and deeper than you ever dreamed. I mean, this is the story that we hear over and over again from all of you at And Then There Were None, that it's so easy from where we sit to judge that journey. And of course, the reality is we've all had experiences of making one concession after another. And suddenly we woke up one day and we're like, what am I even doing? Right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I tell people that they're like, "Why don't they just stop? Well, why don't you just stop?" What is your most common sin, right? Like, I mean, lying, gossiping, like, just stop it. Stop doing it. Like, why do you keep confessing that same sin over and over again? Just stop it, right? Like, if it was that easy to just stop sinning, then we wouldn't need God, right? We wouldn't need Jesus Christ. Like, he wouldn't have need to come. Like, it's just not that easy. It's just not that easy to walk away from sin. It's just not that easy to walk away from the enemy. If it was, Jesus isn't necessary. Like, sin is tempting. Duh. Like, that's what the Bible says. Sin is tempting. Sin is fun. If sin wasn't tempting, we wouldn't want to do it. That's what I tell people all the time. They're like, "Oh, I don't know how they could do that." I'm like, "Well, how do you do what you do all the time? Like, how do you sin the way you sin all the time?" Like, I may not, like, I know people literally they've said that to me, and, like, I know some of their like, I know, maybe they've cheated on their husband. I'm like, "I don't know how you cheated on your husband." Right? But, like, I don't get that, right? We don't have to get each other's sins to understand that we serve a very loving and forgiving God, and we can bring any sin to him and be forgiven.
I think there's so many times that we all buy into the counterfeit. And of course, we very quickly realize there's often death and destruction on the other side, right? I mean, it truly is, but for the grace of God, go I. Of course, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't examine ourselves and very quickly aim to do better. It's just the idea that, again, my sin may not be your sin. And it's so easy from where we sit to point fingers and say, oh, I would never do that. I've never done that. Well, I can tell you that as Lauren Muzyka, there's former abortion workers that have never said or done some of the things that I've done, right? Or have struggled with the virtues that I've struggled with. Honestly, one of the big ones is humility. I mean, it takes so much humility for a former worker to stand on stage and share their testimony. Like, that would be hard for me to do with some of my past sins, right? So there really is a beautiful humility about all the workers that have been through your ministry. It's so powerful. It's really something for us all to think about. So good. Abby, in your movie Unplanned, this is based on your best-selling book about your exodus from Planned Parenthood and your journey to becoming pro-life. At one point, you show one kind of outreach at your abortion facility versus another. You show very clearly the odd things that pro-lifers did before there was a peaceful, organized outreach through 40 Days for Life and the Stand and Pray program outside your facility, and then how it was different when the focus was peace, prayer, and love. The Grim Reaper costume went away during that time. Some of the more odd tactics fell away when it was just centered on prayer. And I think it really created this safe place. I mean, I watched as a sidewalk counselor outside of your former workplace, right? A lot of people don't realize I used to pray outside of your former workplace in college and reach out for years. And I noticed a huge change when this was the focus. So talk to me about why that version of outreach ultimately led you out of the industry and why it's so important that we pay attention to what we're doing at any moment on the pro-life side of the fence and how that really makes a difference.
I think, certain unplanned kind of made it seem like, it was all just like rainbows and giggles with us outside, at the fence. It wasn't that way. I mean, it was certainly, um, there were certainly times of tension,
Mhm,
um, out on the sidewalk.
mhm.
Um, there was certainly times of, disagreement and, mainly from me. But, certainly times where things got heated, times where things got tense because, we're all human and,
Yeah.
you can't just always keep your cool all the time as much as we want to, and I would intentionally kind of poke them. So
Mhm,
certainly there's times where, you know, it wasn't always just like, "Hey, hey, how you doing?" Like, it wasn't always like that, right? And I think that's kind of important to note because I think people think that you have to have perfection out on the sidewalk in order to win people over,
mhm,
and that's not true. Um,
mhm,
I think you just have to be a real person,
mhm.
and, you know, there were definitely times where I would get into a yelling match with somebody on the sidewalk. Um, and they would yell back at me, right? And that definitely happened a few times because they were just tired of putting up with my crap, right? Um, that definitely happened a few times. And that showed me that they were a real person,
Yeah.
right? Um, and in a way I kind of appreciated that. I think that I was kind of getting under their skin, and that they were human and that there was some emotion there, you know. It's okay. Like, you don't have to be the perfect example of patience all the time. We strive for that, of course. We strive, to always be like that charitable person or whatever.
Mhm,
Um, but I think that there's certainly a difference between having peaceful outreach where occasionally you might get kind of worked up
mhm.
and going out to a clinic where your intention is to be aggressive,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm,
That's the difference.
mhm,
The intention of some of the people that go out to the clinic, their intent is to cause a scene. Their intent is to get into a scuffle, right? Their intent is to get into a screaming match with the women going in or the escorts or the workers. That's their intent.
mhm,
That's problematic because our intent should always be to show the love of Christ. That should always be the intention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes, our flesh gets the best of us, right?
Mhm.
But our intention should be to show up peaceful and prayerful and to show the love of Christ.
Yeah.
Um, if you're going out there with aggression or anger in your heart or even frustration,
Mhm,
that is going to come across in your outreach and it will not be fruitful. And
mhm.
so you might as well just not go. I
Yeah.
mean, that's really the answer is if you're angry, if you're bitter, if you're hurt, if there's an area in your life surrounding pregnancy or anything, miscarriage, abortion, anything like that, that's unhealed in you, you shouldn't go out there.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that there needs to be that sort of self-awareness too in us. We have to be healthy on the sidewalk in
Mhm,
order for us to be able to properly help women and workers going in. And if we're not, we need to have that sort of awareness and we need to be able to step back. There was a guy in College Station, you know who it is. who used to be very aggressive on the sidewalk. And when I left, um, he came up to me and he apologized
Wow.
for being that way.
Mm.
And he said, and he had been that way. And then there was a few years I didn't see him again anymore. And he said, I realized I was wrong. And he said, and so I took several years. I stepped away. I stopped. I stepped away. I didn't come anymore. I knew that I needed to heal. And that is so self aware. And that's really how we all need to be before we step into any activism. We need to be aware of places in our lives that we need to heal.
So powerful. Well, as we wrap up the first part of our discussion here, one other question comes to mind because there's a lot of people out there who are listening to this and they're saying, I don't really feel like I'm making a difference right now. I feel ineffective when I go to the abortion facility as I pray and reach out. Let's just say that they're doing everything right. They're praying, they're making an effort to try to connect with women on the other side of the fence. The abortion center escorts, meanwhile, are being a pain in the rear. They're getting between them and the client. Maybe they're banging cowbells in their ears, blasting satanic music, which, by the way, folks, is actually pretty common. Abby, what would you say to these folks who are really just trying to make a difference?
I would say, the more that people are trying to distract you from your work, I would say the more that tells me you're being effective.
Mm.
Um, I think apathy is the worst to encounter. As someone who goes out to the sidewalk, um, I I like a little I like a little tension on the sidewalk. That tells me that something's working, you know?
Mhm.
That tells me that there's some warring going on. There's some warring for life. There's some warring for souls taking place. And that really reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know? I detest apathy.
Mhm.
And so if I go out there and, an escort is really in my face or, ringing a bell in my ear or yelling in my face or something, I'm like, man, something big is happening here. You know? Like something something's changing. Something's about to happen here. Somebody's about to walk out of that clinic and choose life. Satan is mad.
Mhm.
And that gives me even more strength to keep going. And so that doesn't discourage me in any way. It encourages me. It encourages me to keep fighting, to keep going. It reminds me that this is a spiritual battle. Um, it it reminds me of the importance of prayer. It reminds me that, before we go out to these places, that we really do have to armor up with prayer. It reminds me of the importance of having people with you. If you are someone who reaches out, that you do have a prayer team behind you praying for you as you're reaching out to women. Um, but yeah, I mean, I love it. I love that I guess spiritual tension because you really do feel the good versus evil, you know? And the more Satan is riled up, the more I just feel like God's about to really show up here in a big way, you know? Even if I can't see it, I'm like, God's doing something inside of the heart of a woman in there, you know? Or
Yeah.
he's doing something to a woman who's on the way here right now, you know? And Satan is so mad. He's like stirring people up like crazy right now and something's happening and some woman is just going to drive right by this place because we're here. And the enemy is so ticked. And that's why this is happening right here. And so I'm so thankful to be a part of this right now.
So good. I heard my former boss, David B. Wright, the founder of 40 Days for Life, often say that when we go to the sidewalk, when we participate in the pro-life movement, we are creating a constructive tension that's needed for abortion to end. In other words, people have to wrestle with this. We all have to wrestle with our sin before we can come out on the other side. And just like you said so well, Abby, apathy would scare him as well. We're actually more concerned about the worker or the individual that doesn't seem to care. But the person who's crying, the person who's angry, the person who's spewing vitriol at you, it means something is going on in their heart and mind, right? And our first thing should be to pray. We should be encouraged that we're seeing movement, as hard as it might be to watch. And again, they wouldn't be fighting us so hard if something powerful wasn't happening or getting ready to happen. So good. Well, Abby, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the first part of our discussion here. We're so excited to have you on next week for part 2 of the discussion. So again, to all of you listening, I hope you'll join us next week as we continue this incredibly important discussion. Again, this is baseline for us being able to save more lives and to ultimately end abortion. So I hope you'll join us next week for the next part of the conversation. Thank you again so much, Abby, for being with me today. So powerful.
Of course.
A closing thought for this show. Feeling ineffective in your pro-life outreach? All you have to do is listen to the testimony of former abortion workers talking about how effective you really are when you show up at an abortion facility to pray, love, and peacefully reach out. I think my favorite story might come from a former abortion worker, Kelly Lester. Kelly herself experienced abortion 4 times. She was a drug dealer and found herself working for an abortion facility at one point in Richmond, Virginia. She said that there were times that all of a sudden the equipment would stop working or the lights would flicker or something odd would happen that would suddenly halt abortions. A worker would finally yell out, "Hey, is that guy and his family out there praying again?" And every time, she said, they all said, "Yep." Kelly has since come to Christ, is now pro-life, and part of And Then There Were None. And she shares her testimony around the nation. I'll never forget her telling our Sidewalk advocates, when you feel like there's nothing happening, that's often when a lot is happening in the minds and hearts inside the abortion facility. They know how effective you are. Do you? Something to consider. Well, thank you again so much for being with us. We're going to keep talking with Abby next week, so please join me next Friday for another episode of The Lauren Muzyka Show at 9 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Central on Facebook Live, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Thanks so much, everyone.